Well, it is officially start time, so let me formally introduce and kick things off. Everybody out there, Pitmaster Club members, I see we have about 20 participants so far. I'm Meathead, as I think you know, and there's Clint, as I think you know. And I'm going to see if I can click the right buttons that make this gallery view. I think it's available to gallery view. Some of you out there as attendees, tell me if you can get what they call gallery view. That is, can you see all three of us? Sometimes you can only hear the speaker, but I think I've got it set so you can see all three of us.
Yep.
Let us know via chat. Chat is generally for you guys to talk among yourselves. But if you have questions for Ray or any of us, use the Q&A feature. And I see we already have a Q&A. Mark Garrett. Hey, Mark, a stalwart long-term member and a rib aficionado who is fond of cutting slabs into individual bones, is here.
Before cooking?
Yeah, he's here. For those of you who don't know Ray, I'm not going to do the whole bio. I'm just going to say he's a member of the Barbecue Hall of Fame. Everybody who knows barbecue knows Ray. He is one of the brilliant barbecue cooks of all time. A devotee of the Big Green Egg and Kamados, really understands that cooking environment better than anybody, and it is a special cooking environment. Ray is in St. Petersburg. He's known as Dr. Barbecue. A lot of people have kind of called themselves Dr. Barbecue, but they're just posers. And Ray owns a restaurant in St. Pete. Ray, what is the full name of the restaurant?
Dr. Barbecue.
Well, duh.
Easy to remember. My favorite restaurant down there in the Tampa.
Yeah, Clint goes down there to he has family down in that area. I went down there before it opened, and I haven't been there since it's been opened. What we want to talk to you about tonight, Ray, we kind of want to focus on ribs because I have taken the position, I think Clint's with me on this. Turkey is Thanksgiving, ribs are 4th of July.
Hey, remember, he's the National Turkey Foundation.
I know, you're now Mr. Turkey.
National Turkey Federation.
You can't cook a ham on Thanksgiving, and you can't cook ribs on Thanksgiving. But on the 4th of July, I think ribs are the call. Now, I think you could make the case, Ray, if you wish, that turkey would be a good choice. And in fact, I'm always cooking chicken and other things on our annual 4th of July party, which is not happening this year. But I'd like to kind of hone in on ribs, and especially since I know you cook ribs backyard style, competition style, and restaurant style. So you could perhaps talk to us about all three approaches to ribs. So what I'd like to do—
turkey ribs. You can talk about turkey ribs.
Oh yeah, turkey ribs, indeed.
Well, turkey may not be the most popular thing for 4th of July just yet, but I've only been working with them for about 6 months, so give me a little time.
You're going to fix that. Hey, I absolutely adore turkey. And we have a recipe, an approach, and a concept, and a theory behind turkey. And, you and I should talk about what you think about my concept. But, it's a damn shame people cook it only once a year. This is a white canvas upon which you can apply so many wonderful flavors. But we'll get to that later in part 2, if we may.
Yes.
If I can kick things off, and then Clint, you can join in, and the readers, the listeners can ask questions. Ray, talk about how you like to cook ribs, and perhaps a little bit about what you think the differences are between backyard ribs, competition ribs, and restaurant ribs.
Well, let's just start out talking about ribs. You know, you and I didn't meet, but we were both at my barbecue career starts in 1982 at a rib fest. I believe you were there as well. I mean, ribs, especially growing up in Chicago, that's what barbecue was to us. And to this day, I just think ribs are the thing that people are most passionate about of all the barbecue things. Maybe not the competition guys, maybe not the Texans, but across the board, ribs are just that thing. I always tell people, everybody I know can tell you when and where they had the best slab of ribs they ever ate. I mean, we all can. For me, it's actually a tie. It's between Dreamland in Tuscaloosa and the original Neely's in Memphis.
My God. I remember when I was first getting into the barbecue, Dreamland was denigrated because they cook directly above the coals, and they cook it fairly quickly, and all the barbecue snobs are saying, oh, that's not real barbecue. And I kind of got sucked down that hole until I visited the place. And it's just a whole nother experience. And I dare anybody out there who's a barbecue expert to go to Dreamland and say, oh, that's not real barbecue. Because the University of Alabama football team, which hangs out at Dreamland all the time, will rip you to shreds and throw you in the fire. Talk about what is so special about Dreamland ribs.
Well, yeah, I mean, who the hell are we to tell that place they're not real barbecue? I'm sorry, you know, we get a little full of ourselves sometimes, and I'm guilty of it as well. Dreamland is one of them places, you know, let's think about this now. Now we're all experts. We're crafting these styles of barbecue, and we're emulating them, and we're buying the finest meat, and we got temperature probes and all that kind of stuff, and we got guys writing books about the science of barbecue, and that's all good and well. When they started Dreamland Barbecue, I don't know, the 20s, the 30s, whenever it was, that guy wasn't thinking about all of that. He knew how to cook ribs that his family liked in his yard. So he opened a restaurant, and he did the same way that he liked to do it. And everybody thought it tasted good. And that was his barbecue. You know, that's what we have to respect about these places. When you go to a place like that, a lot of the old places, they do it pretty funky. And you know, it may be contrary to what we know now. Certainly the old places aren't that good at holding food and making it good all day. But it's totally not it's not up to us to judge a place like Dreamland. Now, if you don't know Dreamland, if you've never been, they serve ribs. And until recently, they served ribs and beer and white bread and barbecue sauce. And that was it. And if you go there now, they've added a couple things to the menu. And then they've got the franchise places that have like a full barbecue menu. But
it's not like the mothership.
No, nothing like it at all. If you're ever driving by through Tuscaloosa, just go. You know, if it may not be the best rib experience of your life. I've had some bad ribs there too, but when they're on, man, they're good. I mean, so they cook directly over the fire, much like the Rendezvous in Memphis. It's a grilling kind of situation. But again, a lot of them folks in North Carolina are grilling over the fire too. If they do it right and they get them right, that's their style. Ribs can be a little bit chewy, you know, that perfect bite. As much as I've made a career and a living and my reputation about the barbecue thing, I'm not a fan of some of the stuff that we do, you know, and unfortunately, I'm guilty of having helped create some of it. I was talking to Darren Worth one day and bitching about the whole money muscle thing. And he said, well, you're the guy that showed me how to do it. So I get on my high horse about it, and I'm kind of guilty of it. But we were experimenting back then. We weren't just copying what everybody else does. And since then, I've become much more a fan of the diversity of how you cook everything, frankly. And part of that comes along with writing cookbooks. You know, you write your first cookbook and you give up your 2, you know, barbecue rib recipes you've been working on your whole life. And then all of a sudden you've got to write book number 2 and you have to come up with something different. There you go. That's Dreamland, right?
Yep. Can you see it?
Yep. Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah. This is Dreamland. He's got a slab of ribs on it looks like something you go spearfishing with. and, and that metal panel there is right in front of an open flame. So the ribs are sitting maybe 20 inches above the flame. And I don't know if you can tell from the slabs stacked up in the foreground, but they char slightly like you might see on a steak. And there's that flavor that you might taste from the steak that I've never had on a slab of ribs anywhere else. And it's just wonderful.
Now, the only thing is they don't always look that good. Now, some days, you know, much like the old places, well, last time I was there was no Alto sham next to it. So they either stayed on there to stay warm or you ate them. So if they hung around a little bit too long on the fire, or if it was a busy day, they might have a whole bunch of them piled up on there. And, you know, it's just the nature of the old kind of places. But I'm a huge fan of that. So you know, we try to, you brought up the 3 different styles of ribs, and you're right, but frankly, there's probably 20 versions of each of those 3, except maybe the competition ones at this point.
Yeah.
So this is a excellent restaurant rib to me. At our restaurant and most of the modern restaurants, we have a little bit more of an offset style cooking thing, so we don't cook them like that. But you can still find places all over the South cooking ribs directly over the fire. There's a place here in town, Big John's Alabama Barbecue. That's exactly how they cook. They have actually their pit looks just like that. You know, I embrace that kind of stuff. I embrace all the different things that we see. I don't want it all to look the same. So even we talk about restaurant ribs. Typically, restaurant ribs. Well, you know, boy, it's such a subject. We could talk about it for days. What has become now is pretty much a St. Louis rib with sauce on the side. Now, Dreamland, I'm sure, is cooking whole spare ribs too. I don't know what they are these days, but I once had a guy tell me, you know, if I served him St. Louis ribs, he was going to ask me what happened to the rest of his ribs because that was pretty light. So, you know, we've narrowed it all down to St. Louis ribs, typically cooked. Everybody peels the membrane now. Dreamland probably doesn't.
You do in the restaurant, you do?
Huh? We buy them peeled.
You do?
No, we do peel them. Yeah, that's right. We peel them ourselves.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, you got to, man. It's not that hard. You can't not peel them. I'm sorry. I just don't think.
You
Why
know,
did you get them that weren't peeled?
All right, let's talk about this for just 30 seconds. I think most of our members understand about the membrane. On the back of the slab of ribs on the concave side, there's a membrane. It's called the pleura, and it's what encloses the organs. And depending on how you cook it, it can get really tough and chewy, or it can be rubbery. And then there's a layer of fat underneath. And it's generally considered a good idea to peel that off. A lot of restaurants don't because it requires a little extra labor. But, you know, years ago, my wife and I went to Japan and we took some cooking lessons there. And we learned about what they call kaiseki cooking. And the theme behind kaiseki cooking is you respect your guests. You chop things precisely. You prepare. I mean, on Tuesday night, you might just cook this recipe. But for kaiseki night, you do the same recipe, but you do it with great care and great respect for your guests. And I think that's part of the concept of removing the membrane. You can score the membrane with a knife and it's just fine. And it's just not awful if you leave the membrane on. But I think it's respectful of the guest to remove the membrane. And Ray, you're telling us you do that at your restaurant.
Yes, and I feel exactly the same way, Meathead. I've been teaching barbecue classes for a long time, and I always tell people, don't not peel that membrane off. You invited these people to your house to feed them. I didn't know the fancy word kaiseki, but it's exactly the mentality you should have. You know, you decided to cook ribs for me. Well, I want you to do everything you can for them, whether it's at your house or in the restaurant. Now, you know, there's like everything else, there's other sides of the story. Now, the rib burner guys, the guys that travel around and do all those rib fests, they will all tell you that you don't have to, you don't want to, blah, blah, blah. They're also cooking 1,000 racks of ribs a day. They don't have much labor. They don't want to peel it off. So they score them, and they've developed a pretty good strategy where they grill them. When you see those grills out in the front of the stand, they grill them with the skin down, the membrane down. They get it kind of crispy, and after they've scored it, it's okay. You don't even really notice it on there. And then a lot of the old soul food style restaurants, they're not going to take that off. Nobody's going to bother with that. whole slabs of spare ribs. They'll leave that little flap on. They leave the membrane on. They leave the tips on. You know, that's all good eating stuff too. So, but we've learned over the years, you know, we try to do a little more refined version of everything we cook. I think we all do. That's where the thermometers and all that comes in. So I'm all for peeling the ribs, period.
Well, I would think, doesn't it also help for a restaurant or somebody that's cooking mass quantities if you're moving it around a lot? You know, properly cooked ribs can break apart. You know,
well, once they're cooked, you shouldn't be moving them too much.
Well, yeah, but I mean, for the guys that are cooking at Rib Fest and things like that,
yeah,
perhaps that's another reason to leave that membrane on.
Yeah, but once they score them, it's not going to do any good anyway. You know, it's interesting. When we started building my restaurant, the menu and how we're going to do things, there's a lot of other people involved besides me. But I often tell them when there's things like that, it's like, guys, you know, I've told thousands of people that they have to pull the membrane off their ribs. We can't not do that in my restaurant.
Yeah, it's true.
You know,
all right, Ray, if I come to your house, how would you cook ribs? If I come to your restaurant, how would you cook ribs? And if I come to your booth or stand at a competition, how would you cook ribs?
Let's start with the competition. The competition, unfortunately, I'm going to do the same thing as everybody else at this point. In my early days, I started KCBS in 1991. In those days, we did cook whole spare ribs. We cooked back ribs. We cooked St. Louis cut ribs. You know, there was no definitive way you had to do it. We all tried different things. So, and we tried different sauces, and it evolved. All those categories evolved into, we realized that St. Louis ribs were a lot more consistent. It was an easier bite. The guy was only taking 2 bites. We weren't cooking for dinner. So I'm going to be just like everybody else. I'm going to wrap them. As much as it pains me to be a lemming like that, I'm going to wrap them with some sweet stuff and some fake butter, and I'm going to get them to pretty tender, and you know, put some Blues Hog on top, just like everybody else. So for competition, that's the easy one.
Right.
The restaurant.
Let me just play a little bit of interpreter here, because I suspect 90% of our audience is with you. But for the 10% or the others who are not, when he says wrapping them, he means at a certain point during the cooking process, when they're approaching doneness, but they're not there yet, maybe around 150, 160 temp, when the color looks good, he's going to wrap them in either butcher paper or aluminum foil, which holds in the moisture and essentially kind of braises them, really tenderizes them. And it's a step that competition cooks all do, but I'm going to guess that you don't do if I come to your house.
At my house, depends on the day, what I felt like that day, honestly. The restaurant is the exact opposite. The restaurant we do use St. Louis ribs. In the beginning, we tried whole spare ribs, but most folks don't get it down here in the restaurant. And we had some back ribs, and we were trying to do both. We were going to do one wet and one dry, but it was just more trouble than it was worth. So we are doing St. Louis ribs. We peel them. We put salt and pepper on them. We cook them in the oiler, which is, you know, like a magical thing.
You have an oiler, which is...
No, we cook the ribs in the Old Hickory. I'm sorry. Because
okay.
we like to cook them a little bit hotter. Our oiler runs pretty low. It runs like 205.
You have both, an oiler and an Old Hickory.
Yeah, that's what we have. And
can I again interpret?
Yeah.
Oiler is a classic Texas pit. It burns wood only, right?
Yeah.
And Old Hickory is a classic modern pit that gets its heat from gas, but its flavor from wood. So it's a combination. You use the gas to warm and cook, but you throw the wood in there for smoke and flavor. Am I portraying this correctly?
Yeah, basically. So let's talk about the Old Hickory first. It's like you said, it's modern, and as much as I like it, it's been the cause of a lot of mediocre barbecue, because it's an oven essentially. Now, if we put 2 sticks of wood in when the ribs go in, and then one more in after an hour, like we should, we're going to get a really good flavor of barbecue. We're going to get a nice crust. We're going to get good cooking temp. If we forget to put the wood in, we just cooked it in an oven. So that's my concern with those. But it's real convenient for a restaurant, and we can run it hotter. Now the oiler, also automatic. Both of these are big deal, expensive, huge restaurant equipment. The oiler has the same thing. So there's a big carousel in there, 1,000 pounds of meat can spin around in there. And there's a big firebox. And in between is a vent. And there's actuators that control the vents, and a thermostat, I should say. So the thermostat, when it needs some heat, it opens that little door, it blows a little air on the fire, and it warms up in there. The old hickory works pretty much the same way, but the oiler, if we don't put wood in, the fire will just go out eventually, and there'll be it wouldn't cook. What's so good about both of those, though, is the advantage you have over cooking at home. It's just a huge unit. There's so much airflow within, and the air's constantly moving. So you just don't get stale, smoky flavor very often because you can't. Everything's moving around in there. Sorry, I didn't mean to get off track, but
this is cool stuff.
So we cook our ribs at the restaurant in the old hickory because we like to cook them a little bit hotter. It's up about 275, and the oiler is low and slow. The briskets come out of there looking like a meteorite, just beautiful barbecue, but not really appropriate for the ribs. So we cook them back there, 275, probably 2.5 hours in there because it's full. Yes.
Why 275?
Couple reasons. I happen to like cooking ribs a little hotter. I feel they get mushy if you cook them too slow. And also it's a restaurant. We need to keep them turning and burning. And when it's busy, we need to, if we can cook them a little quicker, we're not going to compromise, but if we can cook them quicker, we're happy to do that.
So this is also a commercial, because if you're cooking at 225, like a lot of us backyard guys, you got to throw them on at 7 in the morning to have them ready for lunch at noon. And then if you get clobbered at lunch, you don't have any food. So if you crank up the temp a little bit, you can still get quality, but you can churn it more.
Yeah, we cook them 3 times a day pretty often.
Really?
Almost always twice a day, yeah.
How long does it take to do, you're doing mostly baby backs now?
No, St. Louis.
And how long does it take you to do St. Louis at 275?
We can do them about 2.5 hours.
Wow.
Well, but it's not relatable to what you're doing at home because that old hickory, when it's full, there's a lot of steam in there.
Yeah.
It's all, everything's dripping on each other. It's different for sure. And we don't wrap them in foil ever in the restaurant. Just no need to, for the same reasons. That inside that old hickory, there's great airflow, so nothing will get smoky, stale smoky. But it also, the humidity is helping it cook, and it's right at 275. You never lose any temp.
So for the audience, if you've never seen it, the old hickory is like a Ferris wheel. Sometimes people call it a carousel, which goes sideways. It's the wrong word.
Oh yeah,
Ferris wheel. It goes round and round, and you've got these big horizontal shelves, and you load the ribs on the shelves, and they go round and round, and they drip on each other. So as the fat renders, it lands on the rib slab below it. Now, some of it doesn't. Some of it goes down into the pit down below and it's collected. But there's also really a humid environment in there.
Right. Nothing's ever dry. It's like raining pork fat in there. I mean, it's a beautiful thing.
Put me on.
I need one of those showers, a pork fat shower.
Yeah.
But seriously, that's what's going on in there. And it's part of we don't think about that much about all these commercial cookers, all the big ones. That's how they work. They've got the racks like that. In the oiler, they're 18 inches wide, and you can like triple them up. So you can put a lot of food in there. But when it's full and it's all hot and drippy, it's definitely raining pig fat in there.
Now,
What's the difference between the oiler and the hickory?
What's that?
What's the difference between the oiler and the old hickory? Why do you have both?
Well, we wanted multiple cookers, just if one goes down, frankly. You don't want to have just one big cooker. And we really wanted, we weren't exactly sure what we were going to cook where. We wanted a lot of options. And so we basically bought what we had room for. And it's worked out well. The Oiler's right out in the middle of the restaurant. The Old Hickory's in the back, just because we ran out of room up front. But it's it's the least sexy thing we have, and it's pretty sexy. But we also have a wood-fired grill that we bought from Oiler, and we have a double X big green egg. So obviously we wanted all that stuff out where everybody could see it. And then we figured we'd decide as we went what we cooked where. And it worked out. I don't know that we planned to cook it hotter in the Old Hickory and cooler in the Oiler, but it worked out that way, and it works out good. Like the chicken and the wings we cook in the back in the Old Hickory because we like to cook those a little hotter too.
So if Clint and I show up at your house, and I'm carrying a bottle of Blanton's bourbon, and Clint's carrying a case of pretty good beer, and you're gonna whoop up some ribs, how are you gonna cook for us?
I actually was thinking about cooking some this weekend, and I had my eye on some baby back ribs. But it's probably now just because I see the St. Louis ribs every day, and if I want some of those, I can eat them whenever I feel like it. And so back ribs is not something that gets cooked at the restaurant ever, frankly. I guess in the middle of the crazy pandemic, we did cook some because we cooked whatever we could get our hands on. But in general, we don't cook them. So I just like them. They're just different. So if I was doing that tomorrow, I would just put some dry rub on them and throw them in the smoker and probably run it nice and low and just leave them alone and do nothing and turn it up a little bit at the end. And I definitely wouldn't put any sauce on. I'd probably put a little more of a dry rub on them at home, just to do something different. I'm a big fan of dry rub Memphis ribs. So, it's not something we sell around here. I don't know that it would translate. But so if I'm doing it at home, that's probably what I would do, just to do something different. But
you gotta have confidence in your meat, not to sauce it.
Well, I'm good with that. I really don't eat a lot of barbecue sauce. I'm going to tell you, at my house, I probably go through most of a bottle of Gates barbecue sauce in a year, and a couple bottles of Sweet Baby Ray's, and that's all we use at home. Really,
you're working with Dizzy Pig, so you could do like 150 different varieties of dry rub ribs.
It's pretty fun, that's for sure. There's 27 different blends, and I was a little overwhelmed by it, so I bought a shelf that hung in my kitchen that I could put all 27 of them up there, so I can look at the whole lot and make up my mind. Here, this is the one I would be using tomorrow. I was just actually eyeing it up. Crossroads. It's a
hold it in front of your face. It's being blocked out. So this is Dizzy Pig. Tell us about Dizzy Pig.
Dizzy Pig is I first met Chris Capel, the guy who started it and runs it, as he was a big Green Egg fan, and I used to make fun of him, and because I just thought it was kind of stupid what those guys were all obsessed with the big Green Egg, and but we became friends anyway. And then I obviously got involved with Big Green Egg, and 17 years later, Chris and I are pretty good friends, and opportunity came up to work together, and he's got a great company. Chris is the guy who started making crazy labels and crazy names on his rubs, in 2004 or something like that. I'm not saying he was the first guy that did it, but it wasn't as prevalent that everybody had a silly name on their rub till Chris came along. But he's a graphic artist, so he does his own labels and the whole logo and all that. But here's the thing that he's doing that everybody isn't doing. They're still grinding all their spices. Chris built a big plant in Manassas, Virginia. They grind their spices fresh for every single thing. They blend them themselves. He was telling me a great story. He said a year or two ago, there was a issue where all the ground cumin out there in the industry got some nuts in it. It could happen, but now nobody knew what they had because everybody just buys their ground cumin as, bulk ground cumin from wherever. Well, Chris, they grind their own cumin seed, so he didn't have any issue with that. It's a big deal. It's different.
So you're going to cook for us. Kenneth Calhoun, one of our participants, has asked me a good question. Time, temp, procedure, differences with baby back and St. Louis and spares. How would you, assuming that most of the people listening are backyard cooks, weekend warriors like me and Clint, How do you go about cooking in the backyard?
Well, you know, we all frustrate ourselves with those questions: time, temp, technique. Well, the answer is yes. You know, I mean, if my grill, an old Texan told me I had a Jedmaster when I was first a competition cook.
I remember Jedmaster.
There's still some good ones floating around.
Rest in peace.
Yeah, well, there's still. I mean, they live on though. I mean, Chris Lilly cooks on it at Memphis in May every
John
year.
Marcus is another fan.
John's got a couple of them. Yeah, John, I think John just bought another one. Ken Hess, who worked with Chris, has opened what's it called, Country Smoke in Lynchburg, Virginia, and he's got a couple of them now. I mean, they're like a secondary market for him now. But anyway, I was set up next to this old Texan and big guy named Bill Myers, who sad story, but he's not with us anymore. But he was an old barbecue guy, and he said to me one day, I was fussing with my cooker, and he said, Ray, if your cooker wants to cook at 210, just leave it alone. Cook at 210. Your ribs may take an extra half hour, but don't worry about it. And I've always lived that way about it. I'm not a big fire watcher. I don't watch my, there's Ken, yeah, in the back room at Big Bob Gibson's. So ideally, this was the challenge, learning to write cookbooks, because now you have to write that stuff down. For me, ribs, generally 275 is the temp I'm looking for. That's probably why we ended up using that at the restaurant. Now, time, I've always gone by, I cook them till they look really good. Now, generally, they're not tender at that point, but they've got a nice bark on them, a nice crust going, and then I will wrap them up in foil or butcher paper, or that would be the two, or throw them all in a pan if you've got a bunch of them. And maybe you put a little apple juice in there and honey and brown sugar and stuff. At home, I wouldn't do that. At home, I would either just keep cooking them until they were tender, and they might be a little crusty on the outside that some judge would terrorize me for, or a yelper, but they'd be good to eat. But then tomorrow I might feel like wrapping them in butcher paper, which I think is really good for ribs, because my beef with butcher paper is, I didn't think of it first, because it was really a great idea, and we all had butcher paper around, and I don't know who was the first guy that did it. I think Aaron gets credit for it, but I'm not sure he's the guy. But it was a great idea, and I just pissed that I didn't think of it first.
Aaron Franklin, you mean?
Yeah, sorry. Thank you, Meathead. I appreciate you tipping me in.
I'm the interpreter.
Yeah, I need one for sure. But anyway, wrapping in butcher paper is, so it doesn't really, you don't get that braising effect. You get some steamage. That's, for ribs in particular, that little bit of steamage is what releases the bone. And while we all say we don't want falling off the bone ribs, we don't want to gnaw them off the bone either. Although I'm not against gnawing them off the bone. But in general, we look for that. Competition has created the standard, whatever that, I don't know where it came from, but somehow we evolved to that standard where you bite it and it comes clean from the bone right where you bit it, and the rest of it stays on. I'm not going to disagree with that. It's a nicely cooked rib if it does that. So we go for that. But that means the bone somehow has to get released before the meat is cooked to mush. And that butcher paper, that little bit of steaming or foil does a great job with it. But at home, there's a good chance tomorrow, if you were here, we'd just keep drinking that Blanton's, and the ribs would stay on the grill until we felt like eating them. And I wouldn't feel bad about that at all.
No. I have enjoyed your hospitality in St. Pete. I have very fond memories of going to a fish restaurant where they smoke mullet. Sam Peters, what's the name of that place again?
Ted Peters.
Ted Peters.
Yeah.
Ted Peters. Been there how many years?
Oh my gosh, like 1904 or something. I don't know. It's epic.
Okay,
it burned down one time and they built it back.
We're here to talk about ribs, but if you ever get down to St. Pete, 2 stops, Dr. Barbecue Restaurant and Ted Peters, which is a little further south near the bay. Been there 100 years more. Especially smoked mullet, which is a oily vegetarian fish that you can't catch on a hook. They rub it, butterfly it, smoke it, and it's wonderful. They also do salmon and other things.
Well, they do a killer fish spread.
Yes.
cheap crackers and some hot sauce with it. I
Cold
just pick
beer.
up a bag and take it home.
Yeah.
For those of
Now,
you
we
that don't live
skipped
in
over.
Florida, there's a nice outside bar right on the
Yeah.
right on the street, basically.
Oh yeah, it's right outdoors.
Well, we talked about removing the membrane and we talked about rubbing, but a lot of folks on here also add a binder. You know, a mustard. When I use a binder, I use mayonnaise because it's pure fat. But is there a reason that you stay away from that, or it's just easier to skin them and rub them?
Well, the real story is back in the early days, that was Paul Kirk. If a lot of you guys don't even know who Paul was, but
Yeah.
Paul was the Baron of Barbecue and a legendary competition figure when I started in the early 90s. But he was just kind of an asshole and still is.
Yeah.
And
He was.
he still is. He is
Yeah.
an asshole. So we buried the hatchet a long time ago, but he's still an asshole. There he is. No, that's Ted Peters. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's
look at
your
that thing. You
that's
said
your-
butterfly it, but notice how it's butterflied. They cut down the backbone and the belly stays together. See, it's kind of reverse of what you might think.
This is the day we dined together, you and I.
Yep. That guy was happy to see us. There you go. That's Florida living. Man, look at how much hair I had. It was great.
You gotta love that flat top.
Yeah, I miss it badly.
All right, so back to Paul Kirk.
So Paul, that was one of Paul's big deals. He would put mustard on his ribs. So I sort of contrarily just made sure to tell everybody they shouldn't do that because the only thing it really did was make a mess. And but then John Willingham, Memphis legend, John Willingham, to this day, John's passed now too, but John was, a lot of my stories are old guys like this. That's the Smokers of Ted Peters. John wrote a book. John, to this day, is the only guy that ever won Memphis in May and the American Royal in the same year. It was like 93 or 83 or something. But anyway, John wrote a book, and in his book, he talked about he would put the seasoning on the meat and essentially walk away from it for a half hour, and then it would be adhered. And he said what he liked about that was the seasoning then was bonding with the meat with just a little bit of meat juice making it tacky, as opposed to putting some oily something or else in between the rub and the meat. So I've always kind of gone with that story, but it really starts with just trying to push Paul's buttons back in the day.
Yeah.
So I rarely, if something is just looking too dry and I'm kind of in a hurry, honestly, splash a little of my beer on it or whatever I happen to have in my hand. I would never bother the whole mustard thing. It just makes a mess, and I don't think it's going to accomplish anything.
Well, the whole idea was to make the rubs stick. I go over to the sink, wet my hands, and pat the ribs with a wet hand. The fact is that that ballpark mustard is mostly water. Maybe some of them have a little wine or vinegar in them, but the amount of mustard seed or mustard flavor is very low. So it's not going to impact flavor. If you want mustard flavor, sprinkle Coleman's mustard on the damn thing.
And if you want vinegar, put some vinegar on it because, like you said, but the concept that little splash of vinegar is going to somehow tenderize it is nonsense too. You know, it just we overthink these things sometimes.
Now, are you cooking beef ribs at the restaurant? We've talked a lot about pork, but
there's Paul.
That's Paul Kirk, the Baron of Barbecue, so-called. He came to Chicago with Artie Davis a few years ago, and I took him to Calumet Fisheries, which I know you know.
Yeah, I was on one of those Chicago Facebook pages the other day, and someone was asking about Calumet Fisheries, if you ever been there. I said, yeah, I was there before it was trendy. They didn't have no ATM when I was there, I guarantee you that.
Well, you know, they were here to taste Chicago barbecue, and I wanted to make the point that this is barbecue.
Oh yeah. Well, I was a truck driver in Chicago for 25 years and drove in all the neighborhoods. I was a delivery driver, and that place, it was a place I would also eat where I could park, but it was real easy to park there, right kind of on the bridge or right before the bridge. And I would go in there and they used to smoke shrimp. Those were excellent.
Oh yeah.
And the whitefish. Yeah. I mean, I've been going to that place for
That's
I
their
haven't been there in 25 years.
Can you see that? That's their smokehouse.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And this is the walls of their smokehouse.
Nice. That's some miles on that.
Oh my goodness.
Nice.
All right, so back to ribs.
Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry
I keep-
about that.
You guys, we got to do a separate smoked fish episode.
Now
a
you're
couple of
talking.
months. So, yeah, I asked you, Ray, do you guys do beef ribs in the restaurant? We've talked a lot about pork today.
Yeah, we wanted to do them from the beginning. Well, we had Lee Jasper was our pitmaster from day one, and Lee is still with the company. He doesn't work as the pitmaster in our restaurant these days, but he's still with us. He bounces around, so we still have him. And Lee is a full-on Texas guy. Lee trained at Kreitz Market in Lockhart with Roy Perez. I mean, just pedigree doesn't get any better than that. And so, of course, Lee wanted to. So we have Texas influences for sure. So, of course, he wanted to have beef ribs. And Roger, who's our owner, Roger and Suzanne are actually the owners of the restaurant. Roger wanted to have them too. So I was like, guys, but the problem with these is they're so expensive. On the plate, when we had them, I think we were charging $38 with a couple of sides. And we had to. It wasn't even a moneymaker at that point. And we went to Certified Angus Beef, and they showed us. You could use these chuck ribs or you could use the plate ribs. And we were like, we don't want the chuck ribs. They're nice and all. It's a little more value, but we wanted a big meaty one. So yes, we put them on the menu from day one and people bought them. Nobody ever fussed about the price. When the pandemic hit, it was all hell broke loose. And I was like, just take those off for now, because I don't know who's going to be getting a $38 rib to carry out. And so at the moment they're off the menu, but I suspect we'll bring them back.
Is the restaurant open yet?
Yeah, we've stayed open. We never closed. We did carry out and delivery services. We've always just done the delivery services. It's a tough business model because they take such a big cut. But what are you going to do? You know what I mean? If people want to buy your food, we always figured they're not coming in. The guy that's sitting there with his app in his hand, he's not coming in. He's not coming to pick it up. So you can either take his business or not. So we do all the delivery services, and we quickly set up a nice online order and drive through, pick it up in the parking lot. So we've done that aggressively since day one, continue to promote it and make a big deal out of it. We would put a bunch of stuff out in the parking lot so people knew we were open. And then in Florida, they allowed us to have 25% inside a month or two ago, and then 50%, and that's where we are now. But it's a big restaurant, so we can make room for everybody, so we're doing okay, frankly. Yeah. And we never closed, and we're probably doing better than most.
We've got a question here from Kenneth Calhoun about his ribs getting a little dry, and we'll ask the detailed question. But one of the things I think all of our listeners might like to have from you is, and I've joked about if Clint and I were to show up, what would you cook for us? But if you're cooking backyard ribs for Clint and Meathead showing up, take us from beginning to end, if you don't mind. What would you buy? How would you prep? What kind of rub? What are you going to do with the membrane? How long? Where are you going to cook? How long are you going to cook? What temperature? When are you going to sauce? Are you going to sauce? Give us, if you would, a sort of a recipe.
And I apologize to the Pitmaster Club members because I'm not trying to duck the question. It's just these days that's how I cook. I cook whatever I'm in the mood for at that point. So this is what I was actually thinking about doing this weekend. I'm going to go buy some back ribs. I'd probably just go buy them at Sam's Club. I'm a big fan of Compart pork. If you feel like bucking up and ordering some of that stuff, it's really good. I think the value is there. But if you didn't order it 2 weeks ago, you're not going to have them for tomorrow.
Say a word about Compart, since not everybody knows who Jim Compart is and what Compart hogs are.
Compart Family Farm, Compart, Minnesota folks, still family farm. Jim Compart is him and his family. Jim's the guy that's out front all the time, but the whole family's up there running it. It's a big company. They're running, it's become a pretty solid size company, but they're still doing things the way they always used to. They bring their sows back in. They they test these things. They ultrasound them. It's a whole thing. Go look at their website, or you can call
Yeah.
Jim. He'll always talk to you about it. But
This
at the end of the
ultrasound tells
day,
them what the fat content of the back is, and they're able to take living hogs and detect the fat content of the muscles and say, this is a breeder.
yeah,
Now they focus on a breed called Duroc,
right.
which is not really a heritage hog, but it's a special breed. And I should add, small commercial here. We have a meetup in Memphis next August, a conference for members of our Pitmaster Club, and Jim Compart's one of our featured speakers.
Oh,
And we'll be serving his pork chops for lunch. And Mark Lambert, whom I know you know, is going to be cooking whole hogs, Compart Duroc hogs for dinner.
well, I mean, the at the end of the day, the Compart pork just tastes that good. The competition guys, they almost all use it. The ones that win at Memphis in May, Mark being one of them. It's just, they do all this stuff. And again, it's, if you enjoy that, look at their website and don't hesitate to call Jim. You can track him down. He'll tell you all about it.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it just flat tastes better than anything I've ever eaten.
And I think you can mail order. I'm lucky. I'm in a West Chicago suburb, and just west of me in Westmont, Westmont, there's a standard market, it's called. They actually sell Compart pork.
Really?
So I can go in there and I can buy baby back ribs or pork chops. They're not in a lot of groceries because it's a small family operation, but they are out there.
It's worth seeking out. It's pretty rare to find it in a store, but it's worth seeking out. They'll always mail order it, and they do a nice job. I've got a standing rib roast in my freezer right now. Their stuff just tastes better. But if you don't order it ahead, you're not going to have it. So I would, given that, then I would just go to Sam's Club and buy commodity pork ribs. They're fine. Try to get the ones that aren't too huge. We used to be able to get 2.25 slab of baby back ribs. Now they get them giant ones in the warehouse clubs, and I don't love the 3+ pound slabs, but whatever. Again, you got to just be flexible. And I would bring them home. They usually don't need much trimming. Look around if there's anything too much fat that's not going to cook, and peel the membrane off. And I would put a light coat and a rub on there. I don't like a heavy coating of any rub. So for back ribs, I would just put a light coat of rub. I would set up my grill to cook at 275. I am not a big smoke eater, so I would use some apple wood or cherry wood. And honestly, I still cook on a big green egg all the time. Even just the charcoal, really, for me, tastes good enough. So if you like a lot of smoke, go for it. That's up to you. And I would put them on there, and I'd go swimming, and I'd make a drink, and I'd hang around. And in about an hour, I'd take a look at them, and I'd probably make another drink. And probably in about 2 hours, they would be getting along. And then I would probably flip them over just to make sure that, because if you get those bigger ones, there's a lot of meat and fat and stuff up on top. Flip them over to make sure you get some good heat that comes up on the meat. So probably close to 3 hours laying there open. And at that point, I would make a decision. I would probably wrap them. At home, I would never wrap them in brown sugar and honey and foil and that stuff. I just would never bother. That's not what I like.
One of this, Ray?
Yeah, that stuff. I mean, I'm guilty.
Be still my heart.
I believe I pioneered Johnny Trigg and the Texans. Jamie Geer was one of the original guys using that stuff.
You got it, Clint. You got to explain what you just did.
What's that?
Well,
yeah,
I mean, Barbecue Pitmasters kind of put the parquet squeeze butter on the map for.
Well, wait.
I'll tell you.
Get rid of the word butter. It's not butter.
But it's 60% vegetable oil spread.
Yeah.
Ray can talk the story of the origin.
It has a butter-like flavor, but
here's how I
explain how the competition guys use parquet.
Well, here's how I remember it happening. I was there when when it
happened. In the room where it happened.
And Moses pulled up, and it's how a lot of my stories start. the Texans didn't all used to come up and cook with us that much. But Johnny Trigg retired, and he started coming and cooking with us more because we had more money, and he was just out with his RV, just him and Trish riding around. And so he would come and cook more in Kansas City and around the country, up in Illinois even. And Johnny, best I know, brought that technique from the way the Texans were doing it. The Texans had their own circuit, really, a couple different ones all over Texas. And now you have to ask Jamie Gear one of these days, but I believe Jamie was one of the guys that pioneered this. So what we're talking about is what all the competition guys to this day do. We talked about cooking them for a few hours, and then you lay out a big double piece of foil, and now in extreme case, you lay down a big bed of brown sugar, probably a pound of brown sugar. You put some of that squeezed margarine on there. You put some honey and tiger sauce, the Caribbean hot sauce tiger sauce, a splash of that. And then you lay your slab of ribs on, one slab, and then you do the whole thing again. You probably got 2 pounds of brown sugar on it, another squeeze of margarine, another drizzle of honey, and another splash of the tiger sauce. Wrap it up and cook it. Now, all that stuff melts down into like a syrup, but it gloms onto the ribs, and it certainly flavors them. And then you take them out, and then you put them back in the grill, and you finish them with a little bit of barbecue sauce. And that came directly from Texas, as I remember it. I think Johnny brought it up and showed all of us how to do it. And I think it came from Jamie and some of his friends. And so, but now, 20 years later, literally 20 years later or more, almost every competition guy still does almost that exact thing.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, people saw it. People saw it on barbecue pitmasters and rushed out to get these blue bottles, and the same thing with like the muffin pan chicken.
Exactly.
Clint has a description of this technique in a recipe he wrote in our rib section, or under competition, or I don't know how many of you are aware, but we just last week published an ebook on Amazon called Ribs Made Easy, and it's $3.99, and it's a combo of efforts from Clint and I. And I'm pretty sure this recipe, or something like this recipe, is in there. And it's the standard approach, as Ray points out, in competition circuits. What we should point out, in competition, the judges get 1 at the most 2 bites. So you got to knock them out of your chair. They got 6 rib slab. How many on a platter? 6, 8? I forget.
6 chicken, 6 ribs, 6 pork, 6 brisket at the end of the day.
Okay, so they've got 6 rib bones laying down in front of them, and they've got the clock ticking, and they have to taste all 6, and they have to score them. And so your rib has to just stand out, and they get 1, maybe 2 bites. That's all they're going to take. So you've just got to I know guys who season the top differently than the bottom, because the tongue hits the bottom of the rib and the top hits the roof of the mouth. I mean, there's just this. But if you ask people like Ray, and I will ask him, if he will cook ribs like this at home, I think I know the answer.
No. Maybe when I was competing, I might have done it because then I saw it as a practice run for myself, but to actually eat them, God, no. It's. I mean, we
have a heart attack eating a half of.
Yeah.
Full wrap.
I mean, we used to say that you couldn't eat a whole slab of these because the whole thing was designed for that one bite. But the other thing that happened was, and this has happened all throughout competition barbecue, and now it's bled over to backyarders as well. This standard just happened. Like I said, we used to cook back ribs, whole spare ribs. We would cook them dry, wet. We would do maybe a little sweeter than the next guy. We all had a different way we did things. Little by little, these standards came to be, and everybody knows them now. There's no secrets, and so they all just meet this standard. I'm telling you, you go judge Jack, Clint, you did it. The food's almost identical.
Yeah, it's really hard. I've judged ribs. I don't judge much anymore because I find it really boring sitting in a tent and tasting 6 slabs of ribs that are pretty much identical. And I used to judge wine. I used to go to the California State Fair. You want to know what torture? The definition of torture is 50 Pinot Grigios. Oh my God!
You know,
mean,
I just had a flashback. The first time I ever heard of you, I was on an airplane, and there was an article in like the Delta magazine or something. You had judged the Jack, I think, right?
Yeah, I think I met you at the Jack. Compared to you, I'm a newbie. I really first got deep into ribs in the mid 2000s, 2005, 6, or barbecue, and I think I met you at the Jack. And the Delta magazine guys asked me for some info, and yes, you're right. We may have chatted there, but you didn't know who the hell I was. I mean, I had to have Chris Lilly explain to me what a brisket was.
Yeah, because Lord knows I don't talk to people I don't know very often.
Yeah.
Pretty much spend my whole day. That's why I can't go to the restaurant right now. People, they all want to touch me and hug me and take pictures with me and shit, which I really appreciate, but it's just not a safe time to be doing that.
Sure.
You have that distinctive look. All right, let's finish the discussion of how you're going to cook that slab of ribs, and then I do have a question from Ken Calhoun, and then we can then ramble on to whatever topics the members have.
All right, so I've cooked them for about 2 hours with the meaty side up on my green egg, which happens to have some heat. A little bit of heat comes from the bottom off that plate. Then I flip them over for about an hour or so because I want to make sure that top part gets cooked even up. So I had about 3 hours. Now I'm probably going to wrap them. If I'm at home, I'm probably just going to grab a piece of butcher paper and wrap them and put them right back in and cook them for another half hour, 45 minutes. And I'm going to reach in and feel them to feel how tender they are. The way I always used to do it, I was taught to do it, was you just pinch them right between the bone. Pinch the meat. There's a little square of meat there. Yeah, there you go.
This is the pink butcher paper.
That's where you want it to be. Or take a toothpick and push it down in, and you'll feel it. As you're going along through the day, always feel it, and you'll feel the fiber when you push the toothpick in, and all of a sudden it'll just give up. All of a sudden it just becomes like pushing it into butter. And for me, at that point, they're done. If you wanted sauce, I would put some sauce on then for about 10 minutes on the grill. If you didn't, I'd be happy and we'd just eat them.
So your doneness test is not a thermometer. It's not the bounce test or the bend test. You're a toothpick tester.
Toothpick and squeeze the meat. Don't even just push down in between the bones, but I like to go under and over and just feel the meat and just touch it. Just like cooking a steak or anything else, you can tell. I mean, it's acquired skill because the first time you do that, you don't know what it's supposed to feel like. But if you try it all the time, you will.
I often tell people that the texture of a good rib should be similar to the texture of a good steak.
Yeah, well, the texture of a good rib should be the way you like it. I'm not mad if it's a little bit chewy. That's not going to bother me at all. My neighbor would like them to be falling off the bone. And the competition perfect doneness is somewhere in between that. To me, they're all right, So I guess the skill is to learn how to get them where you want them. So if you want it a little more tender once they're in that butcher paper on the grill, you want them more tender than me, just cook them a little bit longer and they'll get tender. Now, there was a mention of a dry rib. Now, we haven't talked about that. Frankly, because I'm not that afraid of a little bit of dry. It just doesn't bother me that much. I don't want dried up meat, but cooking at 275 for 3 to 4 hours, your meat shouldn't be dry. Now, you may get a little crunchy edge. My wife's going to fight you for that crunchy edge. I think the competition stuff sliding over to the backyard is good and bad. I think we become, I call them technicians, and so many men have learned to want to cook barbecue, and the guy who has a job, he works all week. And he's planning on cooking on Sunday. So he wants to marinate this thing and then brine it and dry rub it and inject it and sous vide it and grill it and smoke it, do all that to one poor piece of meat just because he only gets to cook once a week. And I think we get carried away with that. I much prefer the simpler approach.
Are there any other ribs that you've done or enjoy? Ray?
Um,
Rendezvous here in Memphis. I'm actually not a fan of the restaurant, but they serve lamb ribs, which
Really?
I absolutely love.
No, lamb ribs are we just can't get them. You know, I mean, I wish I could. I love lamb, but we just can't get them. To me, Rendezvous is the place that, you know, there's not much, I don't know unless Meathead knows better, but they invented the dry rub essentially. You know, it was a Greek restaurant and they made a Greek seasoning and put it on their ribs. And that's the beginning of a complex dry rub.
Yeah, and they cook directly over charcoal, very hot and fast over charcoal.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, and again, they weren't trying to emulate anybody. They were just cooking some ribs. But
Well,
you can go right down the street to Cozy Corner in Memphis, which is they have an aquarium smoker like the guys in Chicago. They cook whole spare ribs. They'll sauce them up if you don't tell them not to, and boy, those are pretty good too. So I don't know. Other than glazed up, too much sweet, too much sauce. Other than that, I like all kinds of ribs.
Yeah, I'm trying to screen share some. There we go. Can you see those?
Yeah, that looks beautiful to me.
Those are dry ribs. Those are ribs, no sauce, just rub. You can see the nice
bark.
Yeah, nice bark on them.
So for a competition rib, that would be far too much caramelization. It would be uneven. There's a little lighter spots and darker spots.
Yeah.
And that's why you shouldn't always just go by that standard.
Yeah, well, if competition ribs, you get your ass kicked out for that.
Right.
I mean, you know,
What a shame.
I love Chinese style ribs. God help you if you try to cook them in a competition. And that's one of the problems with competitions is there's this standard of excellence that people strive for. And if you dare try for creativity, you're not going to go very far. Let me ask you on behalf of Kenneth Calhoun. I have a problem with my ribs getting too dry. Overcooking them, less common on my Weber Performer, but on my OK Oklahoma Bandera and Bronco, it's a problem. Will wrapping them in butcher paper help?
Well, in general, stuff gets dry because you overcook it. That piece of meat was not dry when you got it from the store, and it had lots of moisture in it. If something's dry, it's because you overcooked it. Now, so the competition guys, we want to cook stuff a long time, so we fight it with injections of phosphates, and the butcher paper will help you, yes, as opposed to not wrapping them at all. That's really the reason we do it. You cook them to a certain degree to get nice caramelization and some good smoke flavor on them. Don't feel it needs any more of that. Wrap them and let's get them tenderized and eat them. So if you continue to leave them out in the smoke, you know, I was talking about that old hickory where it's raining pork fat. Well, unless you happen to have, you know, a cooker full of food, which at home you generally don't, the stuff will get dry. So my guess is I think the paper would help you, but I also think you're probably overcooking them.
There you go. All right. We have crossed the 1 hour mark, which is what we kind of roped in as a ribs segment, but
let me say one thing, Meathead.
Yeah, go.
I apologize, guys, if we're not hitting all the marks that you want for exactly how to cook ribs, but I'm not that guy. You know, the competition guys, the current group of them, get one of them guys on there and they'll tell you, you know, 2:00. I was talking to Myron the other day and they were talking about ribs are done at 2:07. I didn't even know. I got to be honest. You know, I would never temping and probing a slab of ribs never crossed my mind. Now, again, I've been out of the game for a while and it's gone a long way. But I apologize. We're not giving you exactly what you want to do this. But I'm not that guy.
I disagree. I think you're giving us exactly what we want. And that is, you know, do what's good for you and what's fun for you. And this is what Ray does. And that's why we've invited you to be our spokesmodel tonight. Let's encourage, there's not a lot of questions in the Q&A. So remember, we're not paying a lot of attention to the chat section. Chat is for you guys, chat among yourself. If you've got a question for any one of the three of us, pop them into the Q&A and we'll share them with Ray or Clint or myself.
Hey, I'm gonna run
But
a
Ray can address. I mean, this is a guy who knows how to cook a lot more than ribs, and I think he's going to the washroom right now. Either
Yeah,
that or get some Blantons.
we can open it up to other questions as well. With
Mr. Bones. All right, Mr. Bones, I think you are in the queue and well, you know, I hate this stuff. There's all kinds of stuff in the chat, but I
yeah,
think
I'll go
Mr.
through it.
Bones is asking a question in the chat. And far be it from me to tell Mr. Bones what to do, because we all know he runs the Pitmaster Club, not me. I don't think he has a question. I think he just got a comment, which is good because his comments are always fun, even if I don't understand him, which is awesome. Scott Trinata, I heard yesterday that you can actually eat rib bones. Is that actually a thing? I have gnawed the end off the rib bone. When the rib bone gets really soft, and I've gnawed the end off of some chicken bones too. I mean, if they get really soft, you can gnaw them off. But there are shards in there. I don't think you want to take the risk of those sharp bone shards stabbing your intestines and creating.
Sometimes people do eat the cartilage if they're doing, if you're doing riblets.
Well, I mean, now this is a health question. We should ask a doctor.
Yeah.
It's coming at you, right?
I'm pre-med. I'll take a look.
I don't think you want to eat sharp-edged bones, but I used to eat shrimp tails and shrimp skins when I lived in Florida. I lived in Florida for many years, and now I'm allergic to shrimp. So there you go. Okay. M. Navarre says, we all think we know what we're doing. We're probably wrong. Yeah, that starts with me. Ray, Jim White asked, do you cook with direct heat on your big green egg for ribs at 275, or do you use the deflector and or a water pan?
Yeah, I use the deflector for sure. I mean, you can cook them direct, but on the egg, they're too close. So I would always use the deflector. I don't use a water pan. I've never been a fan of water pan cooking. Especially on the egg, you just don't need it, and it just makes a mess that you have to clean up. And again, go back to what I said about that. Those ribs weren't dry when you got them. The only way they get dry is you cooked them too much, So if you cook them properly, that's the whole point of cooking barbecue nice and slow. Now, if we want to cook our barbecue at 350, well, then it's a different story. But the whole point of cooking barbecue nice and slow is that it doesn't get dry. So I'm gonna tell you how I learned about that. There's a book back here in my case by a guy named Charlie Note, Knote. Charlie was a food scientist from around St. Joe, Missouri, or somewhere over there. And Charlie started coming around barbecue contests, and he had this book that he was selling. It was a comb-bound book that he was probably having done for him. And it was crazily written. You can still buy the book. It's called Sausage and Barbecue and Sausage Making Secrets by Charlie Note. And there was no other books around for us at that point. And Charlie explained in this whacked out way he wrote that when you brought a piece of meat up to, I believe it was like 160-ish is what he was saying, it began to break down. And when you got into 180-ish range, it began to aggressively drip loss. So that if you could hold that meat in that 160 to 180 range, you would cook barbecue. It would get tender. It would not get dry. Eventually, it would caramelize because you were cooking at a nice slow temp. And a lot of us tried to do it back in the day. When we first started getting thermometers, we would try to hold our brisket right at 180 or something like that, or 175 actually. And and it was tough to do, but it ultimately would work, but it was kind of impossible to do. So it's a big misunderstanding when we talk about briskets being done at 204 and that sort of thing. It's just coincidence. If you cook them a little slower at the restaurant, they never get to 204, and they're beautiful because they don't have to, because it's just that long, slow cook. So I'm of the mentality that putting a water pan in is not going to infuse anything back into that meat. It may keep the outside of it moist, but it's not going to help the inside if you continue to overcook it.
I have to agree.
Really? I didn't see that coming.
Well, the moisture evaporating inside that container is a very low amount of moisture, and the vast amount of it just goes up the chimney. So you're not really adding moisture to the meat. You want to add moisture to the meat, spray it or baste it. What does happen, though, is if you think about this, you're taking the meat out of the fridge, 38 to 40 degrees. You're putting it in a cooker at 225, 275. Vast degree of difference in temperatures. So if you have a water pan in there and the water evaporates, it's going to condense on the cool surfaces. And the meat is a cool surface, just like when you get out of the shower, water condenses on the mirror. So you're going to get water condensing on the meat. Not a huge amount, but enough. So it will slightly moisturize, but it's not enough to retain moisture. The heat in that atmosphere is going to drive moisture off no matter what you try to do. What's the cool thing is the wet surface on the meat is sticky, and smoke will stick to it. So the particles in smoke will adhere to the wet surface. So if you're, for example, cooking on a gas grill where it's very well ventilated, a charcoal grill, you've got control over the air in and out. On a gas grill, you can't control air in and out. So if you're going to smoke on a gas grill, which you can do, you've got a lot of smoke going in the air and a lot of smoke going out. If your meat is wet, it's going to attract and hold more smoke flavor. So it's a good technique particularly for gas grills, to get a greater smoke flavor. But it's not really a moisturizer.
So Adam Perry Lang, if you know who Adam Perry Lang is, I've met a lot of meat freaks in my life. I've never met anybody who knew more about cooking meat than Adam. If you don't know who he is, Google that name, Adam Perry Lang.
Well, he used to own a number of restaurants in New York. Wasn't Blue Smoke his?
No, he had Daisy Mays.
Daisy May. And he's in L.A. now.
Yes, but but Adam also worked for Daniel Boulud at Le Cirque in New York, and when they went to open Danielle, Adam was one of the guys that came with it.
One of the great French chefs and great French restaurants.
Yeah, I mean, so anyway, Adam, when he was first learning how to cook barbecue, he was like this accomplished New York chef, but he wanted to be a barbecue man, and I befriended him, and so I helped him a little bit along the way, and he would always, time he had some barbecue cooking, he would have bacon laying on top of it. It would just, he wouldn't, no matter what he had, there was always something with a bunch of fat just happened to be laying around on top of his meat. And I would do that long before I would worry about the condensation.
John Rogers is asking, hi, John, I know you. What is the most unusual meat you have smoked, and it actually turned out okay?
Years ago, Cabela's had a series of barbecue contests, and they would always have an extra category, and it would be wild game, and we wouldn't know what it was till the last minute. And so that was always interesting. They never gave us anything too odd, though, but I created a recipe specifically for whatever they were going to give us. Usually we got some wild boar, some ribs, or a piece of shoulder or something like that. I forget what else, but the recipe was you cook it for a little while, throw it in a pan, pour a beer on it, cover it with foil, cook it till it was tender, and then taste it. If it tasted good, you were all set. If it didn't taste good, I always had a bottle of teriyaki sauce around. Pour that on it, and it would taste good again. So that's not really the answer to the question, but that's if you've got some weird piece of meat, that's your go-to recipe.
So what is the weirdest piece of meat?
I don't know. I can't think of anything offhand. I mean, we cooked
You were
some
not in on the barbecue Pitmasters where they cook rattlesnake?
I kind of got lucky. I got lobsters and oysters and clams, and the heck else did they give us? I didn't get anything too weird, like some of them guys did. Some of them guys got the fish with the big teeth that they didn't even know what it was. Poor Byron, I'll never forget. Bad Byron had live frogs, and they had to kill him. And the poor guy, Byron's like, Byron's a nice guy. I remember they had him on TV saying a little prayer right before he executed the poor.
Oh my God.
Oh yeah, I got lucky on that one. I didn't get anything too weird. Yeah, I don't know, man. Nothing's jumping out that was that.
How about
weird.
you, Clint? What's the weirdest thing you ever cooked?
I have actually cooked alligator ribs. It took me a while to source them, but I did find them and cook them. They're tiny little racks of ribs.
Yeah, we tried to get them for the restaurant, and it was just too much trouble to get them to maintain.
Well, I don't know if you know this, Ray, but I'm a Florida Gator.
I do know that, yeah.
A class of 71. And if you were serving gator meat in there, that would be fratricide. I don't think I could eat there.
Yeah, that seems to be a thing that's gone away, though. A lot of gators, because, little gator bites in the restaurants are so common now. You don't get a lot of fussing about that, although I'm not in Gainesville, so.
Here's one on steaks, just for a change of pace. Ribeye steaks. How would you do a ribeye steak?
Well, ribeye is what I generally eat. First thing I'll tell you is always, buy a thick steak. Don't even if you like Sandy and I can't eat big steaks anymore. I certainly can't. She never could. So we'll buy one big one and we'll share it because you want to have a steak that's got some girth to it. Now,
so you're talking like 2 inches, inch and a half?
I'd say 2 inches is what I like. Yeah, because that way you give you a little chance to cook it. I veer off on these stories all the time just because I've been around so long. I was writing a book called Barbecue Road Trip in 2005.
I remember that. And you were writing it when I met you.
It was a really good book that nobody ever bought. It went out of date quickly because like restaurants close and stuff, and it's a great idea, but it doesn't work.
Yeah, write that now.
Yeah, well, but again, you could never get it to the market before it was out of date. So we were in Albuquerque at a place called Padrell's, Mr. Padrell's. And I think it's still there. I think he's passed, but he was an old dude, cool old dude. And he came to the restaurant to hang out with me because I was writing about him. And so I'm looking around and I'm in Albuquerque and he's cooking briskets like a Texas place. And I said, Mr. Padrell, why do you cook briskets? Why do you like to cook briskets so much? He goes, I like to cook briskets because they allow me to cook them a long time. And I always think about that. That's the essence of a barbecue cook. Not that I'm in a hurry. I want to figure out how to cook it faster. If I can cook this thing longer, it's going to taste better. And I always thought that was really interesting. So it kind of goes along with steak cooking too. To me, a little skinny steak, it's going to be hard to get it done right in the middle. Now, I know this is going to sound like blasphemy in this world, but I do not reverse sear stuff just because I've been cooking steaks one way my whole life, and I just never bothered to try to learn how to do that. I'm not really appalled when I see a little bit of gray on the edge of my steak like you guys are, I know. And I appreciate that. But so I just sear a steak much like a guy in a steakhouse would. Sear it, maybe move it over to cooler zone or just kind of shut things down a little bit. I find that, with a lot of practice over the years, about the time that thing gets seared just right, it's usually pretty done in the middle for me anyway. You control your heat to where you want it, and it works out just about right. So I'm a pretty basic steak cook. Now, I don't necessarily get them perfect every time, but I don't care.
Yeah. Well, I think you really struck the right chord. The key is when you're cooking steak or anything for that matter, how thick is it? How thick is it? It's the thickness of the meat that determines how you cook it. because meat is generally 70% water, and heat moves slowly through water. And so if you've got a very thick piece of meat, it's going to take longer for the center to warm up. And if you've got a thin piece of meat, like a skirt steak or something, the center is going to warm up faster. So if it's a skinny piece of meat, hot and fast. If it's a thick piece of meat, low and slow. And those are really good thumbnail guidelines, I think. Am I wrong?
No, I totally agree with that. And again, I always feel like with steak and short cooked stuff like that, the way you make it great is to serve it perfectly done. Whether it's a pork chop or a pork steak or whatever that is, a piece of chicken. If it's perfectly cooked, it's going to be good. Now, obviously, you want to try and get some crust on it, but so I would, learn. The thermometer is a great tool, but I always find that, I just don't necessarily have it around. And touch that steak. You're the chef. You can touch it. You can poke at it. Now, but I tell people though, it's an acquired skill. So out of all this nonsense about your hand and your face, I don't really understand that. But
I don't get it either.
If you start,
but Ray, you've been doing it for 100 years.
Well,
you can poke a steak and you know when it's done. I can't. I need a thermometer.
That's how you learn. So every steak you cook, as soon as you take it out of the fridge, feel it. Feel what it feels like. After it sits there for 20 minutes, feel it again. When it goes on the grill, feel it as it's going on. After it's cooked for a little while, feel it. Eventually, you're going to know what it feels like when it's exactly how you want it.
What great advice. What great advice from the master.
I mean, use your thermometer to help you for now, but, eventually you should be able to cook one without a thermometer. What if your thermometer breaks? What are you going to do?
That is true. And seasoning-wise, we're big fans of...
How's your temperature, Ray?
I was 97 the other day when I walked in.
Oh, they checked you at the restaurant?
They checked the employees going in the restaurant. They haven't made me do the check. But down here, we're getting checked everywhere. You walk in, I was at the doctor's office, and they're at the door with that thing checking you.
Ray, another member whose name is impossible to pronounce, KFKAWI. When do you like to salt your ribs for backyard cook, or your rub with salt before you cook? So I think the question is how do you approach salting your ribs?
The new idea of salting stuff ahead of time, I haven't gotten into that yet. It seems to make sense to me. I just haven't gotten around to it. So traditionally, I would season my ribs, take them out, season one side, go light the fire, come back in, season the other side, and when the fire's ready, put them on. Or if I had a situation where I needed to get up at 6 a.m. and cook 20, 30 slabs, I would season them the night before. It's not ideal, but I would do it. But typically for me, just enough to make it stick on there real good. They've got plenty of time hanging out in the smoker. They're going to be in there for 3-4 hours. That rub and the meat's going to get to know each other.
Okay, I'm going to try to interpret a question from Mr. Bones. Mr. Bones is one of our stalwart long-term users who speaks his own language.
Excellent name, Mr. Bones. Good barbecue man name.
Okay, question, boss/guests at all. When you all cook at home, panelists, do you just do it like you really learned to do it decades ago, armed with all the science and an instant read? And instant read, I think he's referring to a thermometer, an ability to feel tenderness, look at the color, etc. on a cooker y'all have used for decades. So I think if I can interpret, he's asking how much of the modern concepts of cooking with thermometers and science do you use versus what you used when you were coming up? I don't know, Mr. Bones, I hope I got you right.
Well, I like to think we were the pioneers. We were of the generation when I first showed up. There was the only guys that sold smokers was Oklahoma Joe, and it was
Yeah.
Joe and Dave Close. There was a guy in Oklahoma, I forget what, the Kingfisher. I don't know if they're even still around. There was nobody else selling smokers like for competition guys. So you had to get your own made. I mean, this is the kind of thing. There was no thermometers. We had little dial ones, you know, or you stole the meat thermometer out of your wife's drawer. I mean, it just all we had. We didn't have thermopens. So, but as that stuff became available, I certainly was a test pilot for all of it. I was a test pilot for Fab B in the early days when it was first coming out, which is one of the phosphate-based injections that the competition guys use. I don't know if Fab B is even still around, but when you see those marketed competition injections, that was the origin of it. And I was all over that stuff. I used it, and I taught a lot of people how to use it. So I just used my Egg Genius, which is the guy that makes it, the smokeware. No, not smokeware, the temperature controller.
Barbecue Guru?
No, it's not. I used those for years, and I used the other one now because Big Green Egg has a branded one. But so I've always been open to that kind of stuff. These days, I'm not that involved in the competition circuit, so I don't really, I don't find that stuff all really important to me to help out with what I'm doing. So I've sort of maybe got stuck in the mud a little bit here with this stuff, but I'm certainly not against it. And if I was still active, I'd be probably using more of it. But I think I'm just by nature not a gadget freak, so I have a hard time with that stuff. I just don't care about it. I know how to cook.
I think it's important to say, if you are cooking to please your friends and family, it ain't that hard. And I think Ray outlined some of the techniques he uses, and we've teased some of it out of him. If you're competing for a $10,000 first prize, every little trick in the book is necessary.
Yep.
You've got to do it all, because it's 1 or 2 bites from the judges.
Well, and so you have that standard that you're trying to meet. If I put some ribs on the grill tomorrow, I might change my mind halfway through and do something else to them, because I can't.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're trying to hit that standard for the judges, you need to be that accurate.
And that standard is a moving target. I heard you mention, it went by quickly earlier in the conversation, Blues Hog. Blues Hog is a barbecue sauce. We have a link to it on our site, and it is extremely popular. It's really good, but it has become sort of a standard of excellence. I don't know what we would call it, but so many cooks use it, or a facsimile of it, that if you go off the deep end and you go into ginger or Asian flavors, forget it. Yeah. If you're not using something that has a flavor profile similar to Blues Hog. Now, this may not be true in everywhere around the country, and I think experienced competition cooks. I had a long conversation with Harry Sue, who's a very successful competition cook, and he tells me how he cooks one way in Southern California, another way in Northern California, another way in Arizona, and his flavor profiles change. And he's, the whole the competition circuit. I don't know how many of you out there are thinking about competing, but you better have a lot of money.
Yeah, especially now that it's all heritage breed pork and snake
Wagyu brisket.
Yep.
Yeah, $200 briskets all day.
Big Papa said to me, it's a rich man's sport. It used to be a bunch of guys got together from the backyard and got their Weber Smoky Mountains out there, and it was mano a mano. But now you got to have Wagyu brisket, and you need a trailer with a kitchen in it. Yeah. It's a very tough, competitive world out there. And the fact that it's shown up on TV, and it's made it different and weird.
The horrible thing is they spend $200 on a brisket, and then they inject it so much, all of it tastes like beef bouillon.
T-Bone asks, what's your favorite way to do beef ribs? And we should also talk about what cut. I'm going to, before you get into it, people often ask, what is that cut of beef rib that, excuse me, they call dino ribs that are so popular? If your butcher can't get you what you want, what you're asking for is beef plate ribs or short ribs, and the NAMI, National Association of Meat, NAMI. The NAMI code is 123A. That's what you want. If you tell your butcher you want 123A, you're going to get 4 bones wide, about 8 inches long. The thick end is going to be about 2 inches thick, lots of meat. Thin end is going to be about 1 inch thick. That's the cut you want. Ray, how do you deal with those?
Very much like a brisket. I think they're very much like a brisket. The meat is, that's how it ends up, and that's how it cooks for me. So I would just season them with salt and pepper and put them in the cooker at 225 and ride it and ride it and ride it. Now you might wrap those in the butcher paper at some point, just to, if they're getting to where they're nicely caramelized and they need to keep cooking. That's when you want to wrap them in butcher paper and it'll steam a little bit. But in general, just nice and slow and just let them caramelize. And when they break down, when they're tender, just feel it, and you'll know. All of a sudden, boom, it'll be tender. That's it.
This is the book here. You can buy it online. I don't think it's available on Amazon any longer. North American Meat Institute. North American Meat Institute Meat Buyer's Guide. And it's every butcher should have one. If your butcher doesn't have one, find a new butcher. It's got every cut of meat known to man, and
expensive, that book. You might find a used one.
Yeah, you can occasionally find used ones, and the older models are just fine. I just open up this bone item, I'll forget. It's very specific about what each cut is and how it's cut and prepared. You want 123A from NAMI for the best beef ribs.
Now, Ray, you said salt and pepper only. Aaron Franklin actually has a grind number. I don't know what it means, but he uses a really coarse pepper and actually has a number for the grind that he uses.
Yeah, it's like buying gravel. The actual screening is I don't know what that number is either. But I can tell you, when we were getting ready to open, Lee, our pitmaster, had come from Kreitz. I mean, them guys down in South Texas there, or whatever part of Texas we call that, West Texas, that's what they want. They want that really coarse black pepper, and we couldn't source it without effort. Cisco does not have it. Restaurant Depot does not have it. It was big chunks of pepper, and we used it for a long time, but frankly, a lot of people don't care for it. If you're not in Texas, if you're not a hardcore barbecue freak, on the ribs especially, we were using it on our ribs, and it was just a little too much for most folks. So coarse ground black pepper, you don't want fine ground for sure. The coarser you can find, the better, because I like them little chunks on there. It certainly makes it look nice.
Yeah, and it gives you a real peppery bite.
T-Bone is saying you want 16 mesh. I'm not going to argue with him.
Okay.
I've got a pepper mill that has an adjustment. So if I want really fine pepper for like coleslaw, but I want a really coarse pepper for a steak, I can adjust it. That's a nice thing to get. And I'm pretty sure I have that, my comments, ratings, and reviews on AmazingRibs.com. Go to AmazingRibs.com and search in the free section on pepper grinders, and I think you'll find the model. I think it's a Japanese model, Kawasaki or something. It has a carburetor. No, I'm kidding. Steve B asks, I have a tendency to have my ribs turn out too tough/dry. The best ribs I've made have been on my kettle with a slow and sear. Ray, are you familiar with the slow and sear?
Yeah, I believe that's the thing. It's got like the fires have moved over to the side, and there's a water pan.
Yes. Yeah.
Huh?
My Big Green Egg and my LSG. I don't know what an LSG is. Clint, you or Ray know what an LSG is?
No.
I think an LSG is a landing ship used in on D-Day. Almost always seem to be dry. Any help here? All right, so he's having a dry issue.
I don't know how he's cooking, but in general, it's because you're overcooking them. I mean, to me, that's always the answer with meat. And now there's that weird place in between. And you probably know the explanation for this, where meat before it actually begins to break down is dry. But typically it's not that. It's probably overcooked. We think sometimes you just because it's barbecue, we want to cook it for a long time, and you want to, sometimes that thing might have been done an hour before you took it off.
Yeah.
And I actually like the description of what I would do tomorrow if you were here. There's a good chance I would leave those on for an extra hour or two because we were getting drunk, and then they would be dry, but I would understand what I did there. So maybe
I wouldn't know the difference.
I'm not accusing the guy of that, but in general, though, if stuff is dry, it's because you overcooked it.
Well, there's several different sources of moisture. Water is the most predominant. You're dealing with a piece of meat that's about 70% moist. But ribs have a lot of fat and a lot of connective tissue. And both of them, when undercooked, add nothing to moisture. But when cooked properly, remember, well done is 155. You're taking ribs way up to near 200, 190 to 205, roughly, depending on, various circumstances. So you've gone way past well done. So you're getting moisture from water, but a lot of that water is dripped off or squeezed out. Now you're getting a lot of your moisture from melted fat and from connective tissue, which turns to gelatin. And so
Tasty.
Go ahead, Ray.
I said tasty, delicious gelatin.
Tasty, delicious gelatin. Yeah, this is not Jell-O. And so you've got a combination of all of them going in there. I think you just need to experiment a bit. I don't know that any of us can give you an exact answer to your question, depending on where you live, what altitude you're at, what temperature you're cooking at. I mean, you always check your thermometers. Are your thermometers accurate? Are you cooking at 225, 275? That's what you think. We really don't know
what he's doing. We actually haven't heard what he was doing, but yeah, honestly, most cooks these days have done their homework online, and they're generally in the ballpark.
Now, Mark Garretts, who's another stalwart expert cook member of our Pitmaster Club, is asking, is there a difference between pink and white butcher paper?
I think just color.
The color. Yeah, one's pink and one's white.
Yeah.
Not that I'm aware of. You just got to stay away from any that's waxed if you can help it.
Yeah.
You just want to be unwaxed.
Professor Blonder and I have talked about this. Professor Blonder worked with us. He's our science consultant. His name appears in small type under mine on the cover of the book. He's a food scientist, a physicist, chemist, a man for all seasons. We've talked about what is in pink butcher paper, and I brought some out earlier. Here's a big roll of it. We've got links to it on the site. This is the stuff Aaron Franklin and others use. We don't know what's in here. What makes it pink? So I don't know. We steadfastly avoid any discussion of health issues on our website. I don't know what's healthy, and I don't know that a lot of dietitians and doctors know what's healthy. Because, Ray, you're old enough to remember when butter was bad and margarine was good.
That's not that long ago.
Dietary science is a moving target. And parquet. It's a moving target. All I can say is that, you know, we don't know about smoke. Smoke may be problematic, or and smoke has hundreds of compounds in it. I think the best thing I can tell you is, if you eat a hot dog 3 times a day for 30 days or a year, it's probably not a good idea. There's some evidence that some of the stuff in hot dogs may not be the best stuff for you. But how often do you eat hot dogs? I love hot dogs. We're going to have hot dogs tomorrow night. 4th of July, God damn it, I'm having a hot dog. Chicago style, Ray. All 7 ingredients. I'm not going to make you name them, but I bet you can. And I'm going to have a hot dog tomorrow night. And, you know, I eat hot dogs, 2-3 times a month? You can eat hot dogs 2-3 times a month. I can't imagine that it's going to affect your lifespan. You can eat Cheetos every now and then. You don't want to eat a bag a day. I just think that people who worry all the time about what is in their food are going to die of hypertension faster than anything in the food. Worrying about your food is going to kill you faster than anything you eat.
See, I tend to be the guy that thinks that that peach-colored butcher paper, probably that when they first made it, that's the color it ended up. And then some bastard bleached everything and made the white. So I'm concerned about the white.
Who knows? Orion Fellas tells me LSG is not a landing ship. It's Lone Star Grill's offset.
Yeah.
I think Ray and I and Clint will all agree a good offset's a fine cooking machine, especially if you're cooking with logs. I don't know about Lone Star Grill's models. Maybe you guys do. But the cheap offsets that Home Depot and others sell for $200 are the worst thing that ever happened to barbecue, because people go down to Home Depot and say, I'm going to get a real Texas style offset smoker. And they're thin metal and they're garbage. They leak like a sieve and you just can't control the temperature. And just don't. If you're going to buy an offset, what do you think, Ray? $500-800 is what you better spend to get a good one?
I would be thinking 8 or more, because you know, I mean, you don't have to have an offset to cook good barbecue, so don't buy one that's not going to be a quality piece of equipment. If you can afford a big nice one, sure, they're great, but yeah, if
you've got to have something that looks macho, get a barrel. Yeah, barrels look macho. I mean, your neighbor's going to see you cooking on barrels and say, there's a meat man. And barrels are really good. I mean, the pit barrel smoker, $350 or less, delivered to your door. You can get one, build one, and it looks funny.
After all these years working with Big Green Egg, I'm just still cooking on my green egg. I'm not working with them anymore. The only thing that's even intrigued me is when them barrels do. I'm probably going to get one of them and try it out. It looks like fun.
Noah at Pit Barrel Cooker is a great guy. If you've never met him, I'd be happy to introduce you, and I know he'd send you one.
Well, I wasn't looking for
at $325. I mean, it's within the reach of anyone. Kenneth Calhoun is asking, Clint, what is the explanation of the framed drawing of the skulls and the light bulb behind you?
That is a artist named Ron English. And Ray, I actually noticed that your manager at the Dr. Barbecue restaurant had some Ron English stickers on his laptop in the office the last time I was there.
Really?
Yeah. I collect a lot of urban art, and he makes some art and vinyl toys and things like that.
You know, Clint, you and I are due for a conversation about art, because I think, you know, I did my master's in art, and we've never really had a chance to talk about it, but I know you have an interest in art.
Yeah, I enjoy collecting it. I did some work with graffiti artists back in New York City, so.
Well, we're coming down the home stretch. We're going to wrap up in 15 minutes. Ray, you still with us, or you?
Yeah, I'm good.
You got to go to the bathroom, or you need Blanton's?
No, I'm good. I'm over on this East Coast, and I'm getting kind of old, so it's getting close to my bedtime.
Yeah, don't talk to me about getting old, pal. Thank you very, very much for your participation tonight and your wisdom and your great advice.
Been a lot of fun.
We're running out of questions.
Yeah,
This is your chance, folks.
somebody asked Ray, do you spritz or mop your ribs during your rib cooking? Oh, I keep my grill or smoker closed as much as I can.
Yeah, that's the answer to me. I'll mop if the opportunity arises. There's nothing wrong with it, but unfortunately, most guys use it as an excuse to peek. So if you're mopping or spritzing every 15 minutes or 27 minutes or whatever, don't do that. If you happen to have the door open and you can give it a quick spritz, go ahead. If you're leaving the door open for an extra 10 seconds, I don't think you should be doing it. I think you get much more value out of keeping the door closed than spritzing. So in general, it ends up becoming a bad habit.
Well, you also have to remember, spritzing is moisturizing. It's adding that wet surface, which will attract smoke. But it's also cooling the meat. So it's going to extend the length of your cook. And the moisture is going to extend the length of your cook much more than opening the lid. Because when you open the lid, you're letting hot air out. You close the lid and the hot air builds very quickly back to normal. But what's important to know is that the hot air is not cooking the middle of the meat. The hot air is only cooking the outside of the meat. The outside of the meat is retaining that hot air, the energy from the hot air. And it's acting like a battery or a capacitor. And it's moving that energy towards the center, but it's moving it slowly because the meat is 70% water, and water is a slow conductor. So, and we've done the test, and we have an article about the concept of if you're looking, you ain't cooking. And we've done the thermometers in the middle of the meat and in the surface of the meat and in the atmosphere. And what we've learned is when you open it and close it, open and close it, the air does come out, but you close it and it builds back to normal temperature. The temperature of the surface of the meat does fluctuate, but very slightly. And the center of the meat doesn't notice it one stinking bit because the exterior of the meat's got a lot of energy built up in it. So looking is not the best thing to do because it's letting warm air out and it's letting moisture out, but it's not the end of the world. If you got to moisturize, if you feel the need to baste or spritz and either to slow things down or moisturize or attract smoke, go right ahead if you have to. But also please notice, pardon me, apple juice, beer, wine, it's mostly water. The flavor compounds in apple juice are measured in parts per billion. You're not going to add an apple flavor to your meat by spraying it with apple juice. You're just not going to get it. There's just not enough flavor in apple juice to alter the flavor of the meat. So, excuse me, I seem to have a frog jump down my throat.
You know, I think you said looking, ain't cooking. A lot of that stuff that we still hang on to just because it's a catchy thing to say, that was true when we all had garbage smokers. Like I was saying, when I started, the only place you could buy it, and I didn't have the money to buy one of them smokers, so I had a locker. A friend of mine made me one out of a locker. I had one of the little offsets we used to buy at Sam's Club. The early versions were a little heavier than what we get now, but we just used whatever we had. My buddy made me one out of an old toolbox, and those things weren't that quality. So when you open the door and you had this little fire, or otherwise you'd been burning the food up, maybe when you close the door, it didn't recover that quick. So a lot of that stuff predates the quality equipment we have these days.
Also predates people testing.
True.
I learned the same. I'm guessing all three of us learned from our dads. And my dad learned from his dad. And his dad learned from his dad. And none of them had thermometers. Most of them really didn't study chemistry and physics, meat science. And so we're learning. There's a lot of stuff out there now that wasn't there for our parents' generations. And a lot of it, and you know, Ray, I'm sure you've encountered this, and you too, Clint. Talk to a French chef. They're still doing things the way it was done 100 years ago. And God knows I love French food. My wife and I have made an effort to visit every French bistro in Chicago. But a lot of it is just based on tradition, not science. And, you know, there's a lot. I mean, a great example is you mentioned Adam Perry Lang, a classically trained French chef. But Adam has learned that move along. He understands the contemporary science.
Well, it's that fine line in barbecue. You know, we are the keepers of this. Those of us that are high profile, you know, we do need to embrace these new things, but we can't let the old traditions and the old stuff go away either. You know, we need to somehow find the happy place that embraces the old and the new.
I got a couple of more questions here, and I think we can wrap it up. John Rogers is back with another good question. Favorite smoke profile? Pellet, charcoal, chunks, or sticks?
You know, it would be charcoal, lump charcoal with a little bit of wood added, depending on what I'm cooking. But it's really maybe just habit more than anything, because for 17 years, I haven't cooked on anything but a big green egg. So, and it's not that I don't think the food is delicious coming off a big green egg. I do. So I guess that's why I fall there. I mean, of course, at the restaurant, we cook with all wood, but in the oiler, which I love that food too. It's like, I refer to it as like magic, how well it comes out. But there's a lot of airflow in that thing that nobody's home cooker has got that much free airspace in there, and the constant moving and the fans and everything. So while I love that wood flavor, it can be overwhelming for most cookers. But for me, really, I love the flavor of good lump charcoal, man. It's probably my favorite.
Hey, Ray, I got something that you might get a kick out of. I've got an XL, a Big Green Egg XL, and I had a ring made that is narrower than the opening of the XL. And it's got like little flat ears. So it sits on top of the gasket. You can close the lid, it doesn't affect, but it's a ring that I can hang duck and geese on. Nice. And I'm playing with doing Peking duck and Peking geese, because the Big Green Egg is the closest thing to a tandoor. And I spent some time in a local Indian restaurant cooking on their tandoor, and I'm watching them and I'm saying, oh my God, I have one in my backyard. I've got a Big Green Egg, and I'm playing with, and it's one thing to hang things in a pit barrel, a lot different in an egg. Fun stuff.
Yeah, the only thing I would say in the XL, it's not the deepest vessel. The large is even deeper, and the double X, and then some of the other ones like that. What's that one with the tiles on it? That thing
the Komodo Kamado.
Yeah, that thing you could hang some stuff in.
Yeah, I had one for a while, but I had to send it back. M. Navarre is asking, does the sugar content in the apple juice have an effect on the bark formation?
My guess would be no. In my early days, when I was first learning how to cook ribs, I would spritz with water, vinegar, and soy sauce. The vinegar being, it was Charlie Robinson, who Charlie passed, I think, recently, but in Chicago. Was the guy that won the first Rib Fest downtown Chicago. Mm-hmm. And Charlie talked about vinegar helping melt the fat as he cooked, as he spritzed it on or mopped it on or whatever. And the soy sauce was my addition, because I just always like soy sauce on stuff. And I think the soy sauce might have given it a little color and help with the caramelization. I don't think there's enough sugar in apple juice, actual sugar, that would actually do that. Now, you probably got a better answer than me, but
I have to agree. I think it's the same thing as flavor. There's very, very little sugar. I mean, you know, what is apple juice? Maybe 10% sugar.
It's not even really.
You want to add sugar to the surface of your rub, put sugar on it. white sugar, brown sugar, add sugar to it. That's the way to get to it. Jade Stolar is asking, basically, I'm going to just paraphrase, how do I cook a brisket? Jade, that is a topic for a whole nother session. Got an 8-pound brisket, cooking on a Broil King pellet. It's a great question, and all three of us could go for another 2 hours on brisket. Brisket is, correct me if I'm wrong, gentlemen, possibly the greatest challenge for the barbecue cook, especially the rookie. If you're just, and it sounds like you're just getting started, I would recommend for someone who's really just getting started in smoking and barbecue to start with a 5 to 8 pound pork butt, because pork butt is so forgiving. It doesn't care what temperature you cook it at. It doesn't give a shit. No matter what.
He's already got the brisket, so he's got to cook that.
Yeah, well, put it in the freezer.
What's that recipe with the chili sauce and grape jelly?
Yeah. Oh God.
Oh yeah, the meatballs.
We do have, Clint and I have really in-depth, my Texas brisket recipe on the free part of the website. Go to AmazingRibs.com, search on Texas brisket. You're going to encounter 10,000 words. Give yourself an hour. Everything you need to know about brisket. It's like a small book. That should get you either started or sick to your stomach. But it discusses all the vicissitudes. And I don't mean to slight you, but with about 3 or 4 minutes left, that's just a whole huge topic.
Well, my answer is I always tell people like this. I know, you want the answer, but go online. Instead of looking at every single YouTube video about brisket, pick one. There's one by me that I did with Big Green Egg where you pour a cup of coffee in it. Pick one, do that tomorrow. And then cook another 19 briskets, however you want to cook them. And then we'll start discussing your journey as a barbecue cook for your life. And as asshole as that sounds, it's a lifelong project learning how to cook a brisket.
Well, if I can arm wrestle you, I might say go to AmazingRibs.com and read my article and watch our video, and then go watch Ray's. And there are a bunch of others out there, and you'll just be completely flabbergasted. If you want great success without all the hassle, go read how to turn that brisket into pastrami. I love pastrami, and we know how to do it on AmazingRibs.com, and it's a lot more forgiving than doing it Texas style. All right. We're wrapping up here. I think we've covered most of the questions. Thank you, Ray. You've been very generous with your valuable time. This is a Hall of Famer, man regarded highly by everybody in the barbecue community, generous with his ideas and his advice, as you can see tonight. A fun guy, too. I've had the great pleasure of drinking and eating with him, and I did not get to his restaurant. Clint has been there, but
yeah, make sure if you're in the Tampa St. Pete area, it's right over by the baseball stadium there. And
it's right across the street. And baseball is back. I was interviewed today. You'll get a kick out of this. I was interviewed today by MLB Radio on SiriusRadio.com, and we talked about ribs. And then I just couldn't resist. I said, can we talk about the new rules? I don't know if you guys have heard that the new rules for when baseball goes into extra innings is they're going to put a runner on second base.
You're kidding.
No. So I said, that's ridiculous. I just can't believe. I mean, baseball is based on tradition, history. Don't put a runner on second base. You really want to break. You want to shake things up. Here's what you do. You swap the pitcher and catcher. make the pitcher catch and the catcher pitch for the 10th inning. And after the 10th inning, if it's still tied, you kick out an outfielder, so you only got 2 guys out there. Then you kick out the shortstop, and you keep kicking out a player until the catcher is gone, and then you put the ball on a goddamn tee. And afterwards, you have a handshake line. For crying out loud. They're going to play extra innings with a runner on second base? Oh, my God.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of that.
No.
I mean, they got to they somehow got to speed it up, but
let's boil the ribs, Ray.
where'd Clint go?
Thank you for your time.
Hey, it was a pleasure, man. You guys, I appreciate you guys and everything you're doing. You're doing a lot we used to use the term a lot, promote barbecue. You guys, nobody's doing it better than you guys, and I appreciate you.
We're having fun. And I miss you. And I don't know when I'll be down in St. Pete again, because I'm a decrepit old man and I'm not getting on an airplane anytime soon. But I know our paths will cross again. And when they do, there'll be good food and good drink. And everybody in the Pitmaster Club, thank you for showing up. Clint, you're back, and thank you for organizing this and wrangling Ray into getting in here. And ladies and gentlemen, Clint, what's coming up next month? First Thursday of the month?
I believe we're doing pizza next.
Pizza on the grill. And among our featured speakers will be our very own editor, Dave Joachim, who has written books on pizza, and I'm a pizza aficionado, and we'll talk about simultaneous pizzagasm, how to get the top and the bottom done at the same time.
Please tell the world that Chicagoans do not eat deep dish pizza all the time.
No. yeah, both Ray and I, Chicagoans. I do enjoy Giordano's.
Nothing wrong with it.
Nothing wrong with it.
Friday night, you're ordering a pizza. That ain't it.
The best pizzas in town are thin crust. Okay, everybody.
All right. Happy July 4th.
Have a happy holiday. Have a 5th on the 4th. And be safe, everybody, please.
All right. Good night.